Episode number 31 of the Fired Coaches podcast. Tonight we have a special guest. We don't have a coach, but we have a guy who I consider the original beat reporter of the NBA. Spent much time at the New York Post, TBS, TNT, NBA TV, the NBA, and NBC, which I think a lot of people remember him from, especially myself as a youth. He was inducted into the New York City's Basketball Hall of Fame and in 2009, the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. Tonight, we have Peter Vecsey joining us. Peter, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll jump
You'll regret it. You'll regret it, but it's okay.
We'll jump right into it. Growing up, I know you played a lot of basketball at Rucker Park. You played, if I'm not mistaken, a year at Hofstra. And I wanted to ask, by way of you becoming a journalist, do you think that helped you, kind of having that basketball background, do you think that helped you within the basketball world kind of develop those relationships and connections and kind of trust, being that, you could hold your own on the court as well?
Yeah, I do. I only played 6 months. I left after the first semester. It was my freshman year at Hofstra, just to make things correct. And I left because I left before they asked me to leave, actually. But I was offered a full-time job at the New York Daily News, which you didn't mention. But I started at the News and worked 14 years there as a statistician in the sports department, and then I went to the Post after that. But and the 2 years out in the Army from 65 to 67. But I do believe it. I got better as a player as life went on, and I feel that they could see that I first of all I showed up for events in Harlem that got me really well situated with the Black community. Before anybody, there was a book already written about it, about the Rucker tournament, but I went in there with a team actually in 71 and played, coached, organized. That was Julius Erving coming out of college after his junior year at UMass. And we had a loaded team. I recruited a lot of the Nets, mostly ABA players, a lot of ex-college players, and we were loaded, and we didn't even win the first year. Nate Archibald's team beat us. He was loaded too. They had Austin Carr and Ron Behagen and Jim Brewer, and they were loaded. But so being up there for 4 summers as I was covering the ABA, and then I switched to the NBA in 74. And that really helped me. I've said it many, many times, without the ABA, without the Rucker, I would have gone nowhere. But I did put in the time, and I loved every minute up there. I never once had a problem in Harlem. I came back in the early 80s for 2 years with a whole different team, and with Louis Orr and Sam Worthen, who you probably know from Marquette. And, we were loaded too, but so we won those 2 championships. But I never, 6 years, 6 summers, not one problem, not even a remote problem. So I think that shows you where it was at in those days. And it helped me because those guys, they would pass it on, like Julius Erving would tell people I was cool, and Tiny Archibald would say the same thing, and on and on. And I remember the first time I ever met Jordan, when he was a rookie, I approached him to talk. I'd seen him play in an exhibition game at the Garden before his rookie year, and he was phenomenal. But I didn't get to meet him until a little later. And when I approached him, he said, "I know who you are. You're Doc's guy." There it is.
Good way to be labeled, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
That's awesome. I know in some interviews you've had in the past, you talked about playing against, NBA guys. I think Isiah Thomas, Larry Bird. Can you talk, do you have a good story out of any of those in kind of those one-on-one matchups you had with some of those guys?
I could tell you about the games that I did fairly well. I thought scoring 5-6 points against Bird in an 11 game was pretty damn good, because he was not fooling around, and it was in front of the Celtics. The whole team after practice. Casey Jones let me practice with the team that day, and it was in Sacramento after the All-Star game in '86. Some things you never forget. So those kind of things, I thought I did well. I did real well against Isiah because I played him for the outside shot. I played him in his house. He had a basketball court in his house, and we played 3 games. I did real well against him because he wasn't a great shooter from outside. But I'll tell you 2 stories where I didn't play well. So I was always on Dick Barnett, who played for the Knicks championship team. He was in the backcourt with Walt Frazier when they won it in 69-70. So he was traveling with the team as an assistant coach. He was Red Holzman's first assistant coach. So we'd be on planes and stuff, and I'd be ragging him about, let's play. And we lived in the same neighborhood in Manhattan. So one day we arranged to go outdoors to a playground that was right down the street. It was on 2nd Avenue and 20th, so 21st Street. And so he has me down 9-0 and 10 game, and he's got the ball, and I never touched it. He scored every time. And as he's fading back for his 10th attempt, you remember how he shot? You're too young.
I don't know. Too young, yeah.
He kicked his legs back when he when he took a jump shot. He kicked them backwards. So he's in the air basically, and he said, in Gary, Indiana, this is what we call a black wash.
And that was it then, huh? 10-0.
10-0. And then the other one was I played the Ernie DiGregorio when he was it was after knee surgery. He had won Rookie of the Year. He had won the free throw. He was the best free throw shooter that year. I mean, the guy was unbelievable. I covered him in college. One of the greatest passers of all time, great shooter. But now he has a knee injury, and he was never fast to begin with. So he was recovering from the knee injury. They were about to play the Washington Bullets in the playoffs, first round, and I went up to cover. And after practice, we talked. Let's play. And again, I never touched the ball except to take it out of the net and give it back to him. So he just toyed with me and, talking smack the whole time. And so those were 2 that, an abject failure.
Well, it's always good to hear the positive and negatives, right? I mean, live and learn.
Right. Well, I don't know. I don't know what I learned. Ernie and I stay in touch over the years, and he still talks about killing me. And same with Barnett. Barnett's still alive, and he should be in the Hall of Fame, by the way. Dick Barnett, Tennessee A&I, three championships, and the team is in. He should be in, and he had a great NBA, ABA, ABL career. Jerry West to this day said he was the best backcourt man he ever played alongside. And let's not forget, he played alongside Gail Goodrich.
Wow.
So Barnett should be in the Hall of Fame.
Awesome. I know you've been a big advocate for those guys, of years past and stuff like that. So it's always good to hear. I mean, again, I'm a big historian in just terms of understanding where the game came from, and who was in the past and who played and stuff like that too. So I greatly appreciate that.
Well, let's stay on that subject. Okay. You're from Wisconsin.
Yep.
One of the most flagrant absentee or conspicuous absentee in the Hall of Fame is who? We're talking Wisconsin. Larry Costello.
Actually, it's funny. It's funny you say that. I need to flip around my my monitor here. I don't know if you can see that. Got a Larry Costello.
Yeah, I see it on the right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Larry Costello, not only did he have one of the highest percentages in coaching history in the NBA, won a championship, got to the finals another time. He didn't do well in Chicago because Rod Thorne hired him, and he hired him because he thought that he could get Artis Gilmore the ball, but he just didn't have the right players in Chicago, so he didn't last long there. But a great coach and a great player at Niagara. A lot of people I've talked to over the years said he should be in the Hall of Fame as a player. Bob Cousy told me that nobody played him better defensively than Larry Costello. Came out of retirement when in the 67, let's see if I can get it all right. So he had retired 1 year with Syracuse, then they moved to Philly, and Alex Hannum was the coach, and Will Chamberlain is playing, and Alex Hannum talked his old teammate into coming out of retirement. He starts for the 67 team that winds up winning the championship, one of the best teams ever, but he tears his Achilles during the year. And so Wally Jones winds up taking his place in the backcourt. Now, how tough is Larry Costello? He only sat out. I'm going to do this off the top of my head. I'll say he sat out 6 weeks. Achilles comes back and plays in the playoffs. Not a lot, but played in the playoffs of which Philadelphia won. I mean, it's unfathomable that he is not in the Hall of Fame. And if he doesn't get in this next year, we're making a huge push to get him in. And you talk to any of his teammates who are still alive. Larry died, I believe, when he was 70 or so. And you talk to Hubie Brown or Frank Layden, who are on those Niagara teams, they will swear by him to this day.
Really?
So here you are. You asked me Wisconsin. You're from Wisconsin. I gave you Wisconsin. There you go.
There we go. I appreciate that.
Sure.
You kind of talked about obviously the ABA and then transition into the NBA with you covering that in the 70s. Can you kind of talk about, just from your perspective as a journalist, how things changed? Obviously today we got the internet, we got social media, everybody's a reporter. But when you came up, I mean, to get your information, obviously you had to grind for it. You had to really get your ins and relationships like you were kind of talking about earlier. How did you develop that? How did you get ahead of people? Was it just really outworking people? Did you have just those ins? And talk about kind of that just addictive, kind of grind you had for that job.
Well, I mean, everything you said is part of it. We already went over how I developed a relationship with players. Many of those players became coaches and then became general managers. So it kept moving on. But absolutely worked harder than anybody. I was, you said in the beginning that, the first NBA reporter, but I was the first NBA columnist in the country. In 1977, when the New York Post gave me that column and told me, not the Knicks, not the Nets, you're going to cover the league. And I did. And so,
was not to stop you, but was that labeled the Hoop du Jour? Is that what that was?
It wasn't Hoop du Jour yet. We
Okay.
named it later on Hoop du Jour. No, it's just inside the NBA.
Okay.
But when I was at the Daily News, I tried to do that stuff. Again, developing relationships. So I'll give you an example. So Charlie Scott, who just made the Hall of Fame a year or two ago, played for me in the Rucker with Julius. And so he jumped leagues. He jumped leagues in his second year. He led the league in scoring 1 year, and then he jumps at the end of the second year to the Phoenix Suns. Well, who does he give the story to? Gave it to me. But I'm at the Daily News at that time, and the Daily News really did not care that much about the ABA, and but I still had the story and followed it up. Actually, I ended up going to Phoenix on my own and really followed it up. And if I ever write this damn book, there's a tremendous story about the whole thing, about how I went to Phoenix and got into it with Jerry Colangelo, who was the general manager. He tried to serve me a subpoena, saying I was an ABA, I was working for the ABA and stuff like that, blah, blah. Little truth to it, but not, well, you'll have to wait for the book if I get it. But he tried to serve me a subpoena, and they wound up giving it to David Wolf, who was sitting next to me. David Wolf wrote Foul about Connie Hawkins. And it was at that time that the book had come out, and he was going all over the place. They gave it to David. He goes, wait a minute. That's Vecsey. I'm not Vecsey. But anyway, so he gave me the story, and that's the way it worked. I had so many contacts, and was willing to put in my time. There were many years at the Daily News I was not a reporter. I was a statistician working on my time, covering the Nets in on Long Island. That Island Garden was the name of it. And so I put in the time. I was willing to do it. I laugh when, people come onto a newspaper and they into a sports department and they expect to get a beat, immediately. I mean, it took me years. Now I acknowledge I didn't go to college, but whatever. It's all about getting the stories. And I broke some really big ones at the Daily News. Again, so Julius Erving, when he held out. Hold on a second.
Oh, no worries.
Hold on a second. Hope my door is locked. And when I'm not even in Manhattan, for crying out loud. So when he was holding out from the Nets, claiming that they promised to renegotiate his contract if there was a merger, I would work out with him at West Hempstead High School, just me and him working out. I have photos I'd show you, but I've never showed anybody those photos of me and him working out, and I love those photos, but I'm not going to release them unless I end up writing the book. And then when he's sold, not traded, to the 76ers, he gave me the story. And so it was the front page of the New York Daily News. And so it worked like that. But I was on the phones constantly, throughout my career, building sources I could trust. I mean, that's the key. There were several times, at least 2 times I can think of off the top of my head, where I was led astray on purpose by people who had an agenda and wound up getting sued. But overall, I learned lessons that, that paid off for me down the line. One lesson was, if you're going to get sued, make sure you're indemnified by the newspaper. But the other thing is not to trust people just because they have positions of power or title. One guy who led me astray and got me sued was the commissioner of the ABA at that time. I'm not going to even be able to give you his name because I try to put it out of my mind, but he had a thing. He was the he was the owner of Charlotte, and he got the short end of the stick with Billy Cunningham jumping leagues and stuff like that, and he fed me information on the agent, and it was just bullshit. So I learned, man, you better follow up. If it's a big story, you better really follow up closely. And, and I'll give you an example of that. So I broke the story on guns in the locker room in Washington with Washington,
With Arenas and all that.
Arenas and Crittenden bringing guns in the locker room. So that was my story. But I had it 2 weeks before we went with it. And I told my newspaper, my editor, I said, look, this is too big a story for me to try to pin down on my own. You're going to have to put reporters up front of the paper to help me. And that's what happened. They had their Washington guy, he was working on it. We had 2 guys, in the front of the paper, reporters working on it. And then 2 weeks, we came out with the story. And even with that, I don't mind admitting that we got certain things wrong, but they weren't big things. They were small things. And denials from everybody. Arenas was going to sue me. Crittenden's agent said it was bullshit. All that stuff. Everything that we had was true. Everything. In fact, I was the only one that said Crittenden had a gun, that he brought in his own gun. And the league denied it. The league swore up and down it was not true. Ernie Grunfeld, the GM president at the time, he was denying it to the league back. He had a gun. It turned out, in court that came out. And what happened to Crittenden? He wound up killing somebody in Atlanta in the drive-by, and he's in jail to this day. So anyway, that was a huge story, but I needed help on that for sure.
How different do you think things are in today's world, again, with everybody being a reporter per se, of getting those details down and really, just confirming stories, because again, there's so many people out there that say they have a source, but really Do you think it's different, or do you think it's the same thing of just going about your process and getting to the people you trust?
I really don't, I can't tell you, who's right and who's wrong, only by what happens eventually. But, I maintain that I came back and worked for Patreon a couple of years ago for like 18 months. And I broke two very big stories. One was LeBron. I guaranteed that LeBron was going to join the Lakers the following September. I did it a year in advance, 10 months in advance. And everybody said, bullshit. Yeah, well, he became a Laker. And I also had a story that I'm going to get to my point, but I had a story that the Lakers had tampered with Paul George. And that was my story. And they got fined $500,000 as it turned out. They should have gotten a draft pick or two taken away from them. But whatever. I always told people when I came back, they said, you're never going to be able to break stories like you did before because everybody's on a timeline. You'll have it 1 minute, and then Woj will swear he had it first, or he'll have it 2 minutes later, or the opposite, whatever. And I said no. I said I know I can still break stories that nobody's going to have way in advance, and it's going to take them a long time to figure out what's going on. They never figured out the LeBron thing, although people swore it was not true, but they didn't have anything to back it up. And the people out in LA swore the tampering thing wasn't true. So anyway, my point is that you can still break stories if you have the sources. I really wonder, like a lot of these writers seem to be beholden to management and to agents. And I think nothing proves that more than what happened yesterday in New Orleans when management disclosed that Williamson had broken his foot right after the season on the court. That didn't come out at all until they announced it yesterday. Now, if I'm an editor, I'm saying, like, what the hell happened here? What were you guys doing? You guys swear, Woj. What happened to Woj? I know that's one of his big sources. The general manager of New Orleans. So, obviously, he probably did know and didn't print it, didn't go with it on ESPN. So I'm alleging that. But where were these guys? All these guys who were supposedly great reporters. That I'm telling you, if I were writing that, would have never gotten by me. Not in a million years. Because somebody that I was talking to would have told me about it. So
absolutely. Can you touch on, I believe I read about the Sprewell story with Carlissimo back in December of '97, and you found out about that in the last hour before you had to go to print, basically. And yes. How were you able to just, I know that was kind of the realm and the world you lived in where, breaking news and trying to get information out, but how were you able to flip things around like that so quickly?
Not easy, because I'm not a fast writer at all. But in that case, you get so amped up. And all that day, and I've told this story before, but as far as I can remember now. So all that day I'm calling around. Every day I'm calling around, trying to find out the latest stuff that I can get into the column for the next day. That day, there was a lot of talk about Sprewell being traded. And so I was calling around. He had gotten into it a lot with the coach, Carlissimo. And so he was a problem. We knew that. And I'm calling around. And finally, somebody tipped me off. They said, you should call out to the Warriors. Something big has happened. And it was a league source. And so I called a player who played for them, an ex-player who had played for the Warriors, and told him what I told you, and asked him if he could call somebody who would know what that thing is. He did. He called me back. He told me. And now I have a hell of a story. And so I did. I had to write it within an hour. I told my editor what I had, so they're waiting for it. Player not only strangles coach once, he came back and strangled him a second time. And So that was huge. And I also had a few things that I had on the side on Sprewell, fights that he had gotten into with players on the team. I just kept that on the side, not knowing when I could use it or if I would ever use it. And I used that in the story. And everything that I was given by that ex-player who got it from somebody on the team who was in the gym was true. Not one thing, not one thing. The New York Times tried to come up with stuff. This guy Wise tried to come up with stuff that had happened. It was bullshit. Nothing had happened. He was wrong. So I was really proud of that day. And it's amazing though. I don't think my editor or anybody at the paper ever said, "Hey, good job." It was kind of expected, like
It was almost like what's the next big thing you can get kind of thing.
Yeah, right. And the next big thing was that I got a one-on-one interview with Sprewell. He came into New York City to be with the union people who were trying to fight it and stuff. And I wound up getting a one-on-one interview with him, not only for NBC, who I was working for at the time, but for the Post. And Sprewell wanted to talk to me alone. And the union guy, the union executive, can't think of his name offhand, but who was in Billy Hunter said, "No way, that's not happening." Place was packed, but he wanted to get in a room with me alone. And I said, "Okay, I want it." So we got it. We got alone. And at first he's trying to bogart me, telling me it was bullshit. What you heard is bullshit. And I said, "Hey, you could try it with somebody else." But that was my story. So I know I got the truth. And he ended up being real good about it. Got an unbelievable interview. And we ended up becoming friends. And he lives in Milwaukee, doesn't he?
Yeah, originally from Milwaukee. So I don't know if he's back there, but yeah, originally from there.
Yeah, I mean, we became friends. There's no question. And Carlissimo, I went after Carlissimo in my column. I know why Sprewell went after him, because Carlissimo used to belittle the players, and Sprewell wasn't going to take it, and it just went too far one day, and he went after him. And so I went after Carlissimo as well. And then, he lost his job. And a few years later, I can't tell you how long afterward, but he was out of the league. And NBC was relying on me a lot for who they should hire to be in the studio with me. And I recommended Carlissimo. And they hired him. And, that's never come out that happened. But PJ thanked me because it got him back in the league. And then he became an assistant coach. Then he got another head job, and he's still on TV. I think he's still on TV for ESPN. So it's amazing how things work out.
So you talked about that column, and I think I saw somewhere online, I believe it was maybe Mark Stein in an interview, where he talked about getting that, I think, through a fax machine in the 90s was kind of the way that some of that information was disseminated with the Hoop du Jour. And to me, it kind of reminded me of Seth Godin and his email newsletter and how long it's been going on. Like at that time, that fax had to be, really the Bible of what you were kind of finding out about league news and information. And, in terms of, obviously you wanted quality, but when you're talking about, you're talking to all these people and you're picking up all these little bits of information, how did you decide what kind of made that column and what maybe wasn't as important or had to wait down the road?
Well, I always tried to go with everything that was newsworthy immediately, because any time that I didn't, I ended up getting screwed myself. But I'm going to ask you for a name. So who's the guy who works for Fox, the loudmouth that works for Fox with the football player? He came over from ESPN. He used to work with Stephen A. And then he came over to Fox.
The when it's got the Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp show?
Skip Bayless. All right. So Skip Bayless, I got to give him his due. Skip Bayless is the first guy that ever came up with that fax idea. He was doing it, I don't know, maybe for football, maybe for everything. I can't remember, but he was doing it. And I called him and asked him about it, as I recall. But whatever it is, I copied it. And so I did it with basketball. And what it was the Post column, but then I would expand it by half, because I had an awful lot of info, and I was able to the Post gave me an awful lot of room in those days. They gave me, if I wanted 45 inches, they would give it to me. When I went to USA Today, they paid me a lot of money, and they said, "Well, you have 18 inches." I said, "Wait a minute, he just recruited me, and you're going to give me 18 inches? I'm the highest paid guy on your staff." And oh my God. So, but the Post would give me 45, but that wasn't enough. Many days I had 60, I had 70 inches that I could put out there and put it out on fax, and I would sell it. And that's how Stein got it. I think he was in San Diego at the time. And
Yep, I think he was associated with the Clippers is what I saw. So yeah, in that area. Yep.
right. So we've been close ever since. I respect him a lot.
I think it was in '98 you applied actually for the Nuggets GM job. I saw. Looking back then, obviously to me, being a grade school, middle school kid, growing up watching NBA and NBC, and to me that would have been a hire outside of the tradition of what was kind of going on with how you would hire people. But obviously you had all the connections and insight. Was there any thoughts you had if you would have actually gotten an interview and got that job, what that would have been?
No, I really do think I could have done the job. Look, I'm not the first reporter who ever became a general manager or a president. Let's start at the beginning. The Knicks president was Ned Irish. Ned Irish brought, the Knicks into the Garden, had college basketball at its apex. He was a reporter. He was a sports reporter. So I mean, it started there. The Giants had a, when they were winning championship or Super Bowls, they had an ex-reporter. It's not something that is unique. Then it became the agents. Then the agents got into it, and became like the guy at the Lakers. He was an agent. A lot of the guy in the Knicks now, he was an agent. So whatever would have worked. I've said this before. Isiah Thomas, when he was the president of the Knicks, offered me the GM job. He did offer it to me. I spoke to one of his superiors about it, and I really wanted it. And I had to meet with Dolan, the owner, and it didn't go well in the first 3 minutes, and that was the end of that. I just walked out of the room. I walked out of the hotel, actually. But Isiah said, you couldn't have taken his shit for 10 minutes. You couldn't. What the hell? But I truly believe I would have saved his job, because he made a lot of bad decisions.
In the '97 finals, there's the YouTube video, you interviewing Karl Malone after the game. I want to kind of talk to you about your interview, and how you were very straightforward, asking the tough questions, the fearlessness. To me, and again, this is just a bit of rant on my end, but today's world, from the reporting side and even from the coaching side, I feel like you get questions that are very kind of generic. You don't get real in-depth, detailed asking the tough questions, and you get a lot of coach speak on the other side, which is obviously very boring and just kind of goes on. I saw Shane Beamer, the head football coach of South Carolina, the other day. I don't know if you saw that on the internet. They asked him what happened, against Georgia and why they struggled. And he went on a rant about how they got all these 5-star guys and they're really good. And that's why it was different than the normal,
Right.
Here's why we lost. And it was actually very refreshing. So going back to asking those tough questions and getting honest answers, I mean, do you think that's a thing of the past, or do you think that's still something that can be done today?
It's more difficult now because you don't have the access that I had. Even when you work for a network, even when I worked for a network, I didn't have the access that people think I had. There were times that I would go, cover the Bulls during the playoffs, and NBC would be the first one allowed into the gym after practice, and Jordan and Pippen had already, gone to the locker room. And so now who are you going to interview? You had to, let me see if Will Perdue wants to say something. No, I'm not in the mood to talk. I said, Will, nobody really wants to talk to you. Like, are you kidding me? Turn me down. Thank God in those days for Phil Jackson and John Paxson, because they were always available. But to get back to it, then the league changed a lot as far as just regular reporters, trying to interview people in the locker room. And you had, Nick started it all with PR people going around with Mike, with a tape recorder and putting it in your face as you're trying to ask them questions. It's inhibiting. The player's not going to want to do it. So very, more difficult now than ever. If I could get, I've done a few podcasts for the retired players, and you get retired players and they'll tell you the truth. I mean, I had Jerry West and Oscar and Julius Erving give me great interviews and give great answers to questions I didn't even ask.
Yeah, I was listening the other night a little bit to that one you did with Oscar when you were talking about seeing him at the Garden when he was playing for Cincinnati, and
right.
Yeah, those were good.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they would. I love that. I'm back working for them now. I just agreed to come back and do the same stuff. So I'm hoping to do my first podcast with Bob Cousy is coming back. But the Karl Malone thing you brought up, I don't. It's funny. That interview meant nothing to me. I did the interview. I walked away from it. I never heard anything about it from anybody until 30 years later. I don't know. My son, who's in his 30s now, a few years ago, he said, that interview you did with Karl Malone, like, what the hell? He says everybody's talking about it on the on the internet and YouTube, whatever. And I said, I'm trying to remember, like, oh, they were saying, what's Vecsey trying to do? Get punched out? And I didn't know what they were talking about. So I had to look at it again. And again, I don't think the questions were that terrible. God bless Karl Malone for answering them. He could have not answered them. They were touchy. He could have said, we just lost, get out of my face. He could have easily said that. But he was always a guy that would answer a tough question. I knew that. And I wasn't afraid to ask him something because of his size. I know he's not going to punch me, but I wasn't Isiah Thomas. If I was Isiah, he might have elbowed me. But I didn't worry about it. So anyway, years later, I saw him at the All-Star game in New Orleans, and I told him, I said, everybody's making a big deal about these. Whatever. I said, you and I should do a podcast together. He says, well, you know where to find me.
Oh, so, that would be good.
Right. So he's one of the guys I'm going to go after for an interview. No question.
Yeah. And well, and from me, and the older I get, the more I respect kind of just telling it how it is. And I think, again, asking tough questions, but the right questions. And again, from his spot, he took it great as well. I also think, like, if you're a player and you're being asked tough questions or honest questions, like, there's a sign of respect there, because it's not like you're playing some game and trying to get something out of me. It's really, this is what it is. That's the way I took it too.
Right. Now, if I would have known better to ask John Stockton tough questions after a game, because he was very difficult. I don't think he might have given me a one-word answer.
Really?
Or, no, maybe a two-word answer. And that would have been the end of that. But yeah, Karl was always a good interview. And so I wasn't worried about it. I wasn't nervous talking to him after, a big loss like that, a career-changing loss, basically. Well, I am upset that I didn't think to ask him about, didn't you see Jordan on the baseline? How do you let him steal that ball from you on the baseline?
Yeah, that was huge. That's still to this day. I mean, not really talked about a ton.
Well, they all talk about what Jordan making the shot and pushing where it was.
Byron Russell.
Yeah, Byron Russell. Did he really push him? It never can be proved, but they don't talk about Malone getting the ball stolen on the baseline.
Getting picked from behind. Yep.
From behind, yeah. Jordan's almost out of bounds.
Yep.
Anyway,
nobody talks about that though.
So I wish I had asked him that one. I'll ask him that when I talk to him on the podcast.
There you go. So I know you were, from a distance, right? So I know, you were credited as giving Larry Bird kind of the Larry Legend tagline, and you obviously had a lot of nicknames for players. How did you come up with those? And was it because of you being a writer and being creative and witty that way that it helped you, or was that just kind of a natural for you?
I don't really. Larry Legend I worked on. I remember how it came about, and I really worked on it, and then it just came to me. I'm writing a column about him, and I thought about Billy Idol, and I came to Larry Legend, and that's how it happened. And I just wish I had I'd made money off it. I wish I had, what do you call
Trademarked
it?
it, and
Yeah, I wish I had trademarked. I wish I had trademarked a lot of my nicknames because people have done books on them. They've done podcasts. I'm not documentaries. I got a call the other day from Kevin Durant's people. They're doing a documentary on point guards in New York City. And the name of it is Point Gods, Gods. And the guy called me, he wanted me to be interviewed. And I said, well, you should want to interview me. I came up with that. That was Mark Jackson's nickname I gave him because he was, a religious guy, minister. And whatever, the guy pissed me off. I didn't do it. But, so I said, well, you can steal my nickname for your title, but whatever. Guy wrote a book called The Jailblazers from Portland. That was my nickname. So I wish that I had trademarked a whole bunch of them. And but they, again, I had a lot of people. People say, how'd you come up with all that? I had great writers next to me that would help me. Great contributors. I got a guy, Frank Rucker, who's been helping me for 30 years to this day. He's gonna be helping me with my stuff with the NBA again, to use the retired players. And he's very clever, and a lot of the nicknames were his. So there you go.
that's awesome.
Like somebody asked me the other day, so wait a minute, you don't write all your stuff? I said, wait a minute, does David Letterman write all this stuff? Are you kidding me? Did Carson?
Where's that expectation at, right? It's got to go all the way, or what? I mean,
Yeah, I can't. It is impossible to come up with all the stuff I came up with by myself. Impossible. So I gladly give. I know who gave me every nickname. I know where it came from.
that would be a good podcast alone from yourself, just explaining all the nicknames over the years. I mean, that would be interesting.
Right. Well, my ex-wife was called the Mysterious J, and that nickname came from David Wolf, again, who wrote Foul. He nicknamed her the Mysterious J. So for years, her lines in my column would be the Mysterious J said. But then all the lines that I stole from her that didn't give her credit, but she got that as part of the alimony. So
A couple of questions to finish up here. Do you think we're going to see the NBA in Seattle again over the next 5 to 7 years?
I do. I mean, I talked to Stern when he was alive, and the present commissioner, and they both said at the time, maybe 5 years, they swore Seattle's they're going to put a team back in there one way or the other. Of course, the price has gone up a big time. It's tough to, they don't really want to move teams, that's for sure. But I do believe they'll get an expansion team. These are tough times right now. But I know Adam Silver would love to have a team back. I hope I live long enough for Seattle to get a team back. I have such great experiences from there back in the day. When they started, I was covering Bill Russell as the coach, and I had everything good happened to me in Seattle except the fight in the toy store, which happened during the '96 finals. That'll be a chapter in the book too.
Have you started on that book at all?
Yeah, I started. I've done a lot of stuff, but I'm so disorganized, and
I can imagine there's a lot to sift through, even through your lifetime and covering that. Like, what do you put in and what don't you put in?
Yeah, exactly. What to leave in, what to leave out, as what singer said that. But yeah, so that is the problem. If I didn't have so much to deal with, like my guys on Twitter are after me to do a compilation of my columns, and I'm telling them, like, wait a minute, I've done thousands of columns. How could I possibly go through them and pick out? Like, I wouldn't let anybody pick them out. I'd have to go through them and pick them out, and that means reading every one. And
Do you have those? Do you have those stored somewhere?
I have them here in my apartment, but I don't have them all. The ones in the '80s, '70s, and '80s, I don't have. I have some of them, but unfortunately, I didn't make copies of those. But starting in the late '80s, I definitely have most of them. Yeah.
Very cool. So in today's world, do you enjoy watching the game? I mean, do you still follow it closely? And if you do, what do you think needs to change in the game to continue to develop it moving forward?
Yeah, I did watch the playoffs. I enjoyed a lot of it. I hardly watched a regular season game. I don't follow it like I did. A friend of mine was saying, when you're going to come back and write about the current NBA, I said it's impossible. I said because I swear I don't know. Or I don't know, 1/3 of the coaches. I never heard of them. The general managers, I never 1/3, never heard of them. I can't identify the assholes anymore. That's a problem if you got a column. That's a real problem. You got to go through that process again of learning who's an asshole. I don't like a lot about the game. I'm an ABA guy, but I was a 3-point shooter when I was playing. I had a really good outside shot, and I hate the way they play. Everybody's a 3-point shooter. I wrote to a friend of mine today who was asking me. We used to play in the gym in the '90s, and he works for the New York Times, and he was saying, "Man, you would put it up, from wherever before it was fashionable." And I said, "Yeah, but now I realize why nobody liked playing with me." Because I'm watching these guys today, who wants to watch somebody dominate the ball or come down off the court, come down off a break, pull up from 3.5, not from 3, beyond 3, 4, unless you're Curry and Klay Thompson and Dame Lillard, there are a number of guys who can, shoot the shit out of the ball, but everybody thinks they're a 3-point shooter, and I hate it. They'll go in and they have a layup and they'll dish it out for a 3-pointer. Turn the channel. Now, I'm done. A lot of the rules I don't like. There's still, that Euro step is bullshit. It's a walk. They allow that. Moving picks. They never.
That's my biggest thing. Next to obviously getting extra steps, but the moving pick, it's like. And then it gets called a couple times every game, but it's like it could have been called every single time.
Well, could call it every time. When we played in the gym or outside, you set a moving pick on me, I'm going to elbow you in the head. I mean, it was a definite.
Yep.
Because those moving picks can hurt you. They can break your arm. They can put your hip out of joint. So, there's none of that. Those referees can be standing right next to the guy. He's moving. What the hell? There's a lot of stuff that that hopefully one day they'll clean up. But whatever, I'll pay more attention this year. I did like the playoffs. A lot of players I love. I could watch Curry play every day. Klay Thompson, I'm praying that he comes back and he's fully healthy. And I love watching those two guys together. And but there are a lot of players I like. I fell in love with Trey, Morant. A lot of good young players. Would I like to be their teammate? I don't know. Some of them can pass, and they do pass. But I Harden passed a lot more with the Nets than he did with Houston. Even though he averaged a lot of assists with Houston, how could you play with that guy? He's only going to give it up to you as an afterthought if he's covered by 2 people. I'll be very honest with you. I did not. I had my top 75, right? I have a vote. I didn't vote for him. I am not voting for a guy who I find nauseating to watch play. So I'm sure he'll make it. It's not going to be my vote that's going to cost him.
Yeah, no, I agree with you though too. I mean, your point is spot on. I thought with Brooklyn, he was a lot better. I mean, he was moving it, and obviously, again, you could say, okay, Durant and Kyrie and Blake and whoever else is out there, right? But I thought he was a lot better in that mindset than he was in Houston too.
And Durant was the huge reason why, because they only played 13 games together, so you really don't know what would happen, because Kyrie can over dribble too, and Durant's a hell of a ball handler, and I don't know. Durant's another one I could watch him play any day of the week. LeBron, same thing. I mean, probably 20 guys that I would actually pay to see, guy
Yeah.
Maverick, I love watching Joker. The guys who pass, the guys who make teammates better, those are my guys. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you sitting down, taking the time, telling stories. I mean, this is awesome. Great. I could listen to this all night long. I really do think you need to either try to finish that book or get a podcast and just tell story episodes, because I think that thing would blow up the internet. Just going back to some of the things in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, whatever it is. I mean, I think you get a lot of information that I think a lot of people would love to hear.
I just gave it all to you, though.
That's true. That's true. This is like the preview.
I've given a lot of my meat away, let me tell you.
That's all right. No, I greatly appreciate it. And it kind of takes me down memory lane with some of these stories in the 90s, growing up as a kid and watching the NBA and NBC on Sundays and stuff like that too. So greatly appreciate all of you done for the game and everything like that in general.
Well, it was a great interview.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and have a great rest of the night.
All right. Thanks.